The Blessings of Liberty and Education by Frederick Douglass. Ladies and gentlemen and friends, as I am a stranger among you and a sojourner, you will, I hope, allow me a word about myself, by way of introduction. I want to say something about the day upon which we are met. Coincidences are always more or less interesting, and here is one such of somewhat striking character. This day has for me a special interest. It happens to be the anniversary of my escape from bondage. 56 years ago today, it was my good fortune to cease to be a slave, a chattel personnel, and to become a man. It was upon the 3rd day of September, 1838, that I started upon my little life work in the world. It was a great day for me. With slavery behind me, and all the great untried world before me, my heart throbbed with many anxious thoughts as to what the future might have in store for me. I will not attempt here any description of what were my emotions in this crisis. I leave to imagine the difference between what they were and what they are on this happy occasion. I then found myself in a strange land, unknown, friendless, and pursued as if I were a fugitive from justice. I was a stranger to everyone I had met in the streets of the great city of New York, for that city was the first place in which I felt at liberty to halt in my flight farther north. New York, at the day, was by no means a city of refuge. On the contrary, it was a city in which slave hunters and slave catchers delighted to congregate. It was one of the best fields for that sport this side of Africa. The game once started was easily taken. I was right. If they had caught me, I should have been elsewhere to assist in founding an industrial school for colored youth in Virginia. This is all I have to say on this point. My first thought, German to this occasion, and which this is gonna be a tough read. Holy. My first thought, German to this occasion, and which must have. My first thought, German to this. Hold on. My first thought germane to this occasion, and which must have some interest for us all, very naturally relates to this noted place where we now happen to be assembled. Since the great and terrible battle with which its name is associated, and which has now passed into history as the birth of many battles, no event has occurred here so important in its character and influence, and so ever way significant, as the event which we have this day met to inaugurate and celebrate. To found an educational institute for any people is worthy of note, but to found a school in which to instruct, improve, and develop all that is noblest and best in the souls of deeply wronged and long neglected people is especially noteworthy. This spot, once the scene of a this is gonna be a tough battle. Holy. This spot, once the scene of fratricidal war and the witness of its innumerable and indescribable horrors, is, we hope, to be hereafter the scene of brotherly kindness, charity, and peace. We are to witness here a display of the best elements of advanced civilization and good citizenship. It is to be the place where the children of once enslaved people may realize the blessings of liberty and education, and learn how to make for themselves and for all others the best of both worlds. No spot on the soil of Virginia could have been more fitly chosen for planting this school than this historic battlefield. It is not only the high advantage of forming an instructive contrast in illuminating the compensation possible to mankind by patiently awaiting the quiet operation of time and events, but suggests the battle to be waged here against ignorance and vice. 30 years ago, when Federal and Confederate armies met here in deadly conflict over the question of the perpetual enslavement of the Negro, who would or could have dreamed that in a single generation such change would have wrought in the minds of men that a school... Such changes would have wrought in the minds of men that... I'll start from the... 30 years ago, when Federal and Confederate armies met here in deadly conflict over the question of the perpetual enslavement of the Negro, who would have or could have dreamed that in a single generation such changes would have wrought in the minds of men that a school would have been founded here? For the mental, moral, and industrial education of the children of the same people whose enslavement was sought even by the sword? Who would have imagined that Virginia would, after the agony of war and a time so short, become so enlightened and so liberal as to be willing and even pleased to welcome here, upon her sacred soil, a school of the children of her former slaves? 30 years ago, neither poet, priest, nor prophet could have foretold the vast and wonderful changes which have taken place in the opinions of the American people on this subject since the war. Gotta breathe, sorry. The North has changed, and the South has changed, and we have all changed, and all changed for the better. Otherwise, we should not be here today engaged in the business of establishing this institution. The liberality on the part of the people of Virginia, a typical state of the South, which has encouraged and justified the founding, the industrial school, not only within her borders, but here on the very first great battlefield, between the two great sectors of our Union, is as much the cause of amazement, satisfaction, and joy as it is the readiness with which the good people of the North have responded to the call for pecuniary aid and thus made the enterprise successful. Both circumstances are today causes of joy and congratulation. They show that colored man need not despair, that he has friends in both sections of the Republic. In view of the school and the change in the public sentiment which indicates, we may exclaim with Milton, "Peace hath her victorious no less renown than war." When first invited to speak a few words in celebration of the founding of the industrial school, I was disposed to decline the honor, in favor of some of my younger and better educated brothers. But I am glad that I did not decline the honor. The duty devolved upon me, but which then I hesitated to assume, is in every respect an agreeable duty. I am glad that at my time of life the opportunity is afforded me to connect my name with a school so meritorious and which I can reasonably hope will be of so great and permanent service to a people so greatly needing it. It is in line with my relation to the Negro. I have pleaded the cause of the oppressed against all commerce during more than 50 years of conflict. Were a period put to my career today, I could hardly wish for a time or place or an occasion better suited for a desired ending than here and now. The founding of this and similar schools on the soil of Virginia, a state formerly the breeder, buyer, and seller of slaves, a state so averse in the past to the education of colored people as to make it a crime to teach a Negro to read, is one of the best fruits of the agitation of a century, and a firm foundation of hope for the future. The idea at the bottom of this institution is rapidly gaining ground everywhere. Industrial education is, with me, however, no new idea. Nearly 40 years ago, I was its advocate, and at the time I held it to be the chief want of the free colored people of the North. I was then the editor and publisher of the North Star, a newspaper printed in Rochester, New York. I saw even then that the free Negro of the North, with everything great expected of him, but with no means at hand to meet such expectations, could not hope to rise while he was excluded from all profitable employments. He was free by law, but was denied the chief advantages of freedom. He was indeed but nominally free. He was not compelled to call any man his master, and no one could call him a slave, but he was still in fact a slave to society, and could only be a hewer of wood and a drawer of water. It was easier at that day to get at a black boy into a lawyer's office to study law, or into a doctor's office to study medicine, than it was to get him into a carpenter's shop to push a plane, or into a blacksmith's shop to hammer iron. While I have no sympathy whatever with those who affect to despise labor, even the humblest forms of it, and hold that whatever is needed to be done, it is honorable to do, it is nevertheless plain that no people, white or black, can, in my country, continue long respected who are conflicted exclusively to more menial service for which but little intelligence or skill are required, and for but the smallest wages are paid or received, especially if the labor does not make an effort to raise above the condition. While the employment as waiters at hotels and steamboats and railboats is perfectly proper and entirely honorable, in the circumstances which now surround the colored people, no one variety of the American people can afford to be known only as waiters and domestic servants. While I say this, I fully believe in the dignity of all needful labor. All honest effort to better human conditions is entitled to respect. I have met at Poloid Springs in the state of Maine and at the White Mountains in New Hampshire, and at other places, as well as the late World's Columbian Exposition at Chicago. Many young white ladies and gentlemen who were truly such, students and teachers in high schools and seminars, gladly serving as waiters during their vacation, and doing so with no sense of being degraded in any degree, or embarrassed by such service. This would not have been the case with them if society, by any law or custom, had decided that this service should be, for such persons, their only calling, vocation, in life. Daniel Webster used to say that New Hampshire was a good state to emigrate from. So I say of menial service, it is a good condition to separate from, just as soon as one could find any other calling, which is more remunerative and more elevating in its tendency. It is not the labor that degrades, but the want of spirit to rise above it. Exclusive service or exclusive mastery is not good for the moral or mental health of any class. Pride and insolence will certainly be developed in one class, and weakness and servility in the other. The colored people, to be respected, must furnish their due proportion to each class. They must not all be masters or all servants. They must command as well as be commanded. However, much I may regret that it was my lot to have been a slave, I shall never regret that I was once a common laborer, a servant, if you please. 1 second. However, much I may regret that it was my lot to have been a slave, I shall never regret that I was once a common laborer, a servant, if you so please to term it. But I felt myself as much as a man then as I feel myself as a man now, for I had an ambition above my calling, and I was determined then, as I have ever been since, to use every honorable means in my power to rise to a higher plane of service, just as soon and as fast as that should be possible. My philosophy of work is that a man is worked upon by that upon which he is works. No, hold on. My philosophy of work is that a man is worked upon by that upon which he works. Some work requires more muscle than it does mind. The work which requires the most thought, skill, and ingenuity will receive the highest commendation, and it will otherwise do most for the worker. Things which can be done simply with the exertion of muscle and with little or no exertion of the intellect will develop the muscle but dwarf the mind. Long ago it was asked, how can we get wisdom who heldeth the... Long ago it was asked, how can we get wisdom and who Long ago it was asked, how can we get wisdom who heldeth the plough and whose talk is of oxen? The school which we are about to establish here is, if I understand its object, intended to teach the colored youth, who shall avail themselves of its privileges, the use of both mind and body. It is to educate the hand as well as the brain, to teach men to work as well as to think, and to think as well as to work. It is to teach them to join throughout to work, and thus to get to the very best result of thought and work. There is, in my opinion, no useful thing that a man can do that cannot be better done by an educated man than by an uneducated one. In the older slave times, the colored people were expected to work without thinking. They were to be the hands, only hands, not heads. Though was the prerogative of the master, obedience was the duty of the slave. I, in my ignorance, once told my master that I thought a certain way of doing some work I had in hand was the best way to do it. He promptly demanded, "Who gave you the right to think?" I might have answered in the language of Robert Burns, "We are designed your lading slave, by nature's law designed. Why was independent thought ere planted in my mind?" But I had not then read Robert Burns. Burns had high ideas of the dignity of simple manhood. In respect of the dignity of man, we may well exclaim with the great Shakespeare concerning him, "What a piece of work is a man! How noble in reason! How infinite in faculty!
in apprehension, how like a god, the beauty of the world, the paragon of animals. Yet if a man be benighted, yet if a man be benighted, this glowing description of his power and dignity is merely a glittering generality, an attempt to tolmate of words without any support of facts. In his natural condition, however, man is only potentially great. As a mere physical being, he does not take high rank. Even among the beasts of the field, he is not so fleet as a horse or hound, or so strong as an ox or a mule. His true dignity is not to be sought in his arm or his legs, but in his head. Here is the seat and source of all that is especially great or practical importance to him. There is a fire in the flint and steel, but it is friction that causes it to flash, flame and burn and give light where else all be darkness. There is a music in the violin, but the touch of the master is needed to fill the air and the soul with the concord of sweet sounds. There is powder in the human mind, but education is needed for its development. As a man is the highest being on earth, it follows that the vocation of teacher is among the highest known to him. To properly teach is to educe man's potential and latent greatness, to discover and develop the noblest, highest, and best that is to him. In view of this fact, no man whose business is to teach should ever allow himself to feel that his mission is mean, inferior, or circumscribed. In my estimation, neither politics nor religion present to us calling higher than his primary business of unfolding and strengthening the powers of the human soul. It is a permanent vocation. Some know the value of education by having it. I know its value by not having it. It is a want that begins with the beginning of human existence and continues through all the journey of life. Of all creatures that live and move and have their being on this green earth, man, at his birth, is most helpless in need of instruction. He does not even know how to seek his food. His little life is menaced on every hand. The very elements conspire against him. The cattle upon 1,000 hills, the wolves and bears in the forest, all come into the world better equipped for life than does man. From first to last, his existence depends on instruction. Yet this little helpless weakling, whose life can be put out as we put out the flame of a candle, with a breath is the Lord of creation. Though in his beginning he is only potentially this Lord. With education he is the commander of armies, the builder of cities, the tamer of wild beasts, the navigator of the unknown seas, the discoverer of the unknown islands, capes and continents, and the founder of great empires, and of capable of limitless civilization. But if man is without education, although with all his latent possibilities attaching to him, he is, as I have said, but a pitiable object, a giant in a body, but a pygmy in intellect, and at best but half a man. Without education, he lives within the narrow, dark, grimy walls of ignorance. He is a poor prisoner without hope. The little light he gets comes to him as through dark corridors and grated windows. This sight and sound which reach him, so significant and full of meaning to the well-trained mind, are to him of dim and shadowy, uncertain import. He sees, but he does not perceive. He hears, but he does not understand. The silent and majestic heavens, fretted with stars, so inspiring and uplifting, so sublime and glorious to the soul of other men, bear no message to him. They suggest to him no idea of the wonderful world in which he lives, or of the harmony of this great universe, and hence impart to him no happiness. Education, on the other hand, means emancipation. It means light and liberty. It means the uplifting of the soul of man into the glorious light of truth, the light only by which man can be free. To deny education to any people is one of the greatest crimes against human nature. It is to deny them the means of freedom and the rightful pursuit of happiness, and to defeat the very end of their being. They can neither honor themselves nor their Creator. Than this, no greater wrong can be inflicted, and on the other hand, no greater benefit can be bestowed upon the long benign people than giving to them, as we're here this day endeavoring to do. This the means of useful education. Dude, it is aimed to make them both better and more useful in life, and to furnish them with increased means of livelihood, to make of them more skilled workmen, more useful mechanics, and better workers in wood, leather, tin, and iron. It is sometimes said that we have done enough for the Negro, that we have given him his liberty, and we should now let him do for himself. This sounds well, but that is all. I do not undervalue freedom from chattel slavery. It was a great and glorious triumph of justice and humanity. It was the first of long years of labor, agitation, and sacrifice. But let us look at this emancipation and see where it had left the Negro, and we shall see how far it falls short of the plainest demands of justice of what we owe the Negro. To find an adequate measure of compensation for any wrong, we must first discern the nature of the extent of the wrong itself. The mere act of enslaving the Negro was not only wrong done him, nor were the labors and stripes imposed upon him, though heavy and grievous to bear, the sum of his wrongs. They were, indeed, terrible enough, but deeper down, and more terrible still, were the mental and moral wrongs, which enter into his claim for a slightest measure of compensation. For 240 years, the light of letters was denied him, and the gates of knowledge were closed against him. He was driven from time to eternity in the darkest ignorance. He was herded with the beasts of the field, was without marriage, without family, without schools, and without any moral training, other than which came by the slave driver's lash. People who live now and talk of doing too much for this Negro think nothing of these things, and those who know them seem to desire to forget them, especially when they are made the bias of a claim for a larger measure of justice to the Negro. They forget that for these terrible wrongs there is no redress and no adequate compensation. The enslaved and battered millions have come, suffered, died, and gone with all their moral and physical wounds into eternity. To them, no recompense can be made. If the American people could put a schoolhouse in every valley of the South, and a church on every hilltop, supply with a teacher and preacher each respectively, and welcome the descendants of the former slaves to all the moral and intellectual benefits of the one another, without money and without price, such a sacrifice would not compensate their children for the terrible wrongs done to their fathers and mothers by the enslavement and enforced degradation. I have another complaint. It is said that the colored people of the South have made but little progress since their emancipation. This complaint is not only groundless, but adds insult to injury. Under the whole heavens there was never once a people liberated from bondage under conditions less favorable to the beginning of a new and free mode of life than there were freedmen of the South. Criminals guilty of heinous crimes against the state society are let go free on more generous conditions than we are our slaves. The despotic government of Russia was more liberal and humane to its emancipated slaves than our republic was to ours. Each head of a family of slaves in Russia was given 3 acres of land and necessary farming implement with which to begin life. But our slaves were turned loose without anything, naked to the elements. As one of the number of the enslaved, I am none the less disposed to observe and note with pleasure and gratitude every effort of our white friend and brothers to remedy the evils wrought by the long years of slavery and its I'm gonna skip that word. In such wise I rejoice the effort I made here today. I have a word now upon subject, and what I say may be more useful than palatable. That subject is the talk now. See, okay, hold on. Let me lock in for a second. That subject is the talk now so generally prevailing about races and race lines. I have no hesitation in telling you that I think the colored people and their friends make a great mistake in saying so much of race and color. I know no such bias for the claims of justice. I know no such motives for the efforts at self-improvement. In this raceway, they put the emphasis in the wrong place. I do now and always have attached more importance to manhood than to mere kinship or identify with any variety of the human family. Race, in the popular sense, is narrow. Humanity is broad. The one is special. The other is universal. The one is transcendent. The other permanent. In the essential dignity of man as man, I find all necessary incentives and aspirations to a useful and noble life. Man is broad enough and high enough as a platform for you and me and all of us. The colored people of the country should advance to the high position of the Constitution of the country. The Constitution makes no distinction on account of race and color, and they could make none. We hear. Sorry about that. We hear since emancipation much said by our modern colored leaders in condemnation of race pride, race love, race effort, race purity, racemen, and the like. One man is praised for being a race man, and another is condemned for not being a race man. In all this talk of race, the motive may be good, but the method is bad. It is an effort to cast out Satan by Beelzebub. The evils which are now crushing the Negro to earth have their root in sap. Their force and mainspring in this narrow spirit of race and color, and the Negro has no more right to excuse and foster it than any man of any other race. I recognize and adapt no narrow basis for my thoughts, feelings, or modes of action. I would place myself, and I would place you, my young friends, upon grounds vastly higher and broader than any founded upon race and color. Neither law, nor learning, nor religion is addressed to any man's color or race. Science, education, the word of God, and all the virtues known among men are recommended to us, not as races, but as men. We are not recommended to love or hate any particular variety of the human family more than any other. Not as Ethiopians, not as Caucasians, not as Mongolians, and not as Afro-Americans or Anglo-Americans are we addressed, but as men. God and nature speak to our manhood, and to our manhood alone. Here all ideals of duty and moral obligation are predicted. We are accountable only as men. In the language of Scripture, we are called upon to quit ourselves like men. To those who are everlastingly prating about race men, I have to say, gentlemen, you reflect upon your best friends. It was not the race of the color of the Negro that won for him the battle of liberty. That great battle was won, not because the victim slave was Negro, a mulatto, or an Afro-American, but because the victim of slavery was a man and a brother to all other men, a child of God, and could claim with all mankind a common father, and therefore should be recognized as an accountable being, a subject of government, entitled to justice, liberty, and equality before the law, and wherever else. Men saw that he had a right to liberty, to education, and to equal chance with all other men in the common race of life, and to pursue of happiness. You know that, while slavery lasted, we could seldom get ourselves recognized in any form of law or language as men. Our old masters were remarkably shy of recognizing our manhood, even in words written or spoken. They called a man with a head and white as mine, a boy. The old advertisements were carefully worded. Run away, my boy Tom, Jim, or Harry. Never, my man. Hence, at the risk of being deficient in the quality of love and loyalty to race and color, I confess that in my advocacy of the colored man's cause, whether in the name of education or freedom, I have more to say of manhood and what is comprehended in manhood and in womanhood than of the mere accident of race and color. And if this is disloyalty to race and color, I am guilty. I insist upon it that the lesson which colored people, not less than white people, ought now to learn is there is no moral or intellectual quality in the color of man's cuticle. That color, in itself, is neither good nor bad. that to be black or white is neither a proper source of pride or shame. I go further and declare that no man's devotion to the cause of justice, liberty, and humanity is to be weighed, measured, and determined by his color or race. We should never forget that the ablest and most eloquent voices ever ablest and most eloquent voices ever raised in behalf of the black man's cause were the voices of white men. Not for the race, not for the color, but for man and manhood alone. They labored, fought, and died. Neither Phillips, nor Sumner, nor Garrison, nor John Brown, nor Gerrit Smith were black men. They were white men, and yet no black men were ever truer to the black man's cause than were these and other men like them. They saw in the slave manhood, brotherhood, womanhood outraged, neglected, and degraded, and their own noble manhood, not their racehood, revolted at the offense. They placed the emphasis where it belonged, not on the mint, inness, and cummin of race and color, but upon manhood and the weightier matters of the law. Thus, compassed about by so a great cloud of witness, I can easily afford to be reproached. Thus compassed by so great a cloud of witness, I can easily afford to be reproached and denounced for standing in defense of this principle against all commerce. My position is that it is better to regard ourselves as a part of the whole than as a whole of a part. It is better to a member of the great human family than a member of a particular variety of the human family. In regard to men, as in regard to things, the whole is more than a part. Away, then, with the nonsense that a man must be black to be true to the rights of black men. I put my foot upon the effort to draw lines between white and the black, or between blacks and so-called Afro-Americans, or to draw race lines anywhere in the domain of liberty. Whoever, and for equal rights, for equal education, for equal importance for all men, or whatever race and color, I hail him as countryman, clansman, kinsman, and brother beloved. I must not further occupy your time, except to answer the brief inquiry, what of the night? You young people have a right to ask me what the future has in store for you and the people with whom you are classed. I have been a watchman on your walls for more than 50 years, so long that you think I ought to know what the future will bring to pass and to discern for you the signs of the times. You want to know whether the hour is one of hope or despair. I have no time to answer this solemn inquiry at length or as it deserves, and will content myself with giving you the assurance on my behalf. I think the situation is serious, but it is not hopeless. On the contrary, there are many encouraging signs in the moral skies. I have seen many dark hours, and yet I have never despaired of the colored man's future. There is no time in our history that I would prefer to be present. Go back to the annexation of Texas, the fugitive slaves, law times, and the border war in Kansas. The existence of this industrial school at Manassas is a triumph rebuke to the cry of despair now heard in some quarters. Nor does it stand alone. It is a type of such institution in nearly all the southern states. Schools and colleges for colored youth are multiplying all over the land. Hampton, I can't pronounce that. Hampton, Cappahoosic are brilliant examples. The light of education is shedding its beams more brightly and more effectively upon the colored people in the South than it has ever did in the cause of any other emancipated people in the world. These efforts cannot fail in the end to bear fruit. But it is said that we are now being greatly prosecuted. I know it, I admit it, I deplore it, I denounce it. Attempts are being made to set aside the amendments of the Constitution, to wrest us from the elective franchise, to exclude us from the respectable railroad cars, to draw against us the color line in religious organizations, to exclude us from hotels, and to make us prescribed class. I know it all. And yet I see it all a convincing evidence for our progression and the promise of a brighter future. The resistance that we now meet is the proof of our progress. We are not only the people who have been prosecuted. The resistance is not to the colored man as a slave, a servant, or a menial, or as a person. It is aimed at the Negro as a gentleman, as a successful man and a scholar. The Negro in ignorance and in rags meets no resistance. He is rather liked than otherwise. He is a thought to be in his place. It is only when we acquire education, or it is only when he acquires education, property, popularity, and influence, only when he attempts to rise above his ancient level where he was outnumbered with the beasts of the field, and aspires to be a man and a man amongst men, that he invites reparation. Even the laws of the South exclude him from railroad cars and other places. Care is taken to allow him to ride as a servant, a valet, or a porter. He may make a bed, but must not sleep in it. He may handle bread, but he must not eat it. It is not the Negro, but the quality of the Negro that disturbs popular prejudices. It is his character, not his personality, which makes him an offense or otherwise. In one quality he is smiled upon as a serviceable animal. In the other he is scorned as an upstart entirely out of his place, and is made to take a back seat. I am not much disturbed by this, for the same resistance in kind, though not in a degree, has to be met by white men and white women who rise from lowly conditions. The successful and opulent esteem them as upstarts. A lady as elegant and splendid as Miss Potter Palmer of Chicago had to submit to the test. She was compelled to hear herself talked about as a shoddy upstart, the wife of a tavern keeper, and the like, during the Columbian Exposition. But the upstart of today is the elite of tomorrow. A ship at anchor with halyards, broken sails, midweed, hull empty, her bottom covered with seaweed and barnacles, meets no resistance. She lies perfectly still, but when she spreads her canvas to the breeze, turns her prow to the open sea, and sets out her voyage, the higher shall be her speed, the greater shall be her resistance. So it is with the colored man. He meets with resistance now, because he is now, more than ever, fitting himself for a higher life. He is shedding the old rags of slavery and putting on the apparel of freedom. In my conclusion, my dear young friends, be not discouraged. Accept the inspiration to hope. Emanate the example of the brave mariner who, amid clouds and darkness, amid hail, rain, and storm bolts, battles his way against all the sea opposed to his progress. You will then reach the goal of your noble ambition in safety. 1894.